You're listening to the Property Management Excellence Podcast for insights that drive rapid rental growth.
Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Great to have you with us. Alex Whitlock with you, co-founder of Managed, director of real estate business, joined by a guest today that I'm very excited to chat with. I've known this person for a long time. I've watched his business grow. I'm really excited to dig into some of the fundamentals that have made his business so successful in a very short period of time. Somebody who understands property management. Look, prior to having his own gig, he has many years in the business. Grant McKay, new management. Pleasure to catch up.
Excellent to see you. Thank you for the invite.
I want to kind of go back, Grant, to really looking at the sort of foundations of your business. Look, giving people a bit of a snapshot. Just give me a bit of a sort of an overview of where you are at today with new management, you know, the size of your agency, the team you've got, and then we can start to look. I want to look at what has driven your success.
Yeah, sure. So we are sitting between 3 and 4 years now. I had been in the industry for a couple of decades, showing my age, and then basically based on the observations that I had made of what the industry was missing, kind of gave me that final nudge to go out on my own. So yeah, coming up to 4 years, where we've got mid 200 properties, and a team of 4. So myself, what I've done is I've tried to sort of tweak the titles a little bit differently, but we have, rather than property managers, we call our guys sort of client relations or property services. So I've got a property, sort of a senior property service person, individual, which is the senior property manager. We've got the client services executive, who's like our leasing person. And then I've got a business development manager. And then myself we're at a size that I'm still very involved with the operations. And that'll be the next step, to try and sort of work on the business and not in it. But at the moment, startup business, we're all hands-on, overlapping each other. But yeah, a few hundred properties. We started from scratch.
You did. So it's all organic growth.
All organic growt.
Just give us a bit of an insight into the territory that you cover.
Yeah, sure. Region.
Yes.
Region. Yeah. So we what based in a city or in a East Sydney, and then we cover 90% is the eastern suburbs. Yeah, so around that city fringe on the eastern suburbs side, and then we're up to Vaucluse, down to Maroubra, anywhere in between.
Competitive market.
Yeah, there's a lot of options. Yeah, for people, and I mean, it's a good market. I've lived around there for decades. I won't say exactly how long, but great lifestyle, really broad appeal. No, it's exciting. Yeah.
So I want to just sort of go back to you have many years working within other organizations. What was the point in your career where you went, I'm going to do this, and I want to do this myself? And I want to really sort of go back to that and look at, so from that moment of thinking I can do this myself, and then actually looking at how you structured and got started, because starting off organically means you're starting with zero PUM.
Correct.
And that means zero cash flow.
Correct.
And that's challenging.
Correct.
So what was that point in your career?
Well, yeah. And, I think just to, rather than the business and the potential money, the potential asset, I seem to be very different to a lot of general people in the property management space, in that I'm quite passionate about it. I'm quite passionate about the client experience. I'm quite passionate about what is missing and what I've observed to be missing over a number of years. So it was very much that drive that made me break away and go out on my own, more so than the asset and the financials. But it's a tough look. I had to make really significant sacrifices because I knew that it was a scale-up business.
Yep.
So I had to have a little bit of a padding of some funds, but I made a big change. I was renting a property around sort of the Potts Point area for I was paying, I think, about $1,300 a week in this great apartment, had views and everything. And I knew there was going to be a couple of years before I paid myself, and I was committed to doing this from scratch. So I downgraded to a studio. I think it was $400 a week, and then just head down and got into it. But it's a scale-up business. There's no doubt about that. And you know, for the first year, it's tough because activity definitely creates activity. And when you're starting, there's no presence on real estate or domain. Nobody knows you apart from your own contacts. So it felt very slow to start with. But again, my focus was being it at the long haul, but it was not about what's coming this week and what's the financial gain to that. It was really from day one, I wanted to carve out a service provider that was doing something different. It really was the driver for me. So I was patient, and of course, it did grow year on year a lot quicker, but starting from scratch was tough.
And in so many cases, property management is the also ran with a top sales agent. They understand conceptually the value of building a rent roll, but have very little idea or no idea of how to actually build and structure that. But you don't have a sales side of the business.
Just do property management.
Yeah.
Focus, one lane. That's all we do. Yeah.
It's a commitment because you are doing one thing and you're going to do it well, and you've committed to doing that.
Yeah.
You left left a role previously as a BDM.
Yep.
So lucrative.
Yep.
Yeah, sales role within property management.
Yep.
You obviously took with you those skills and the knowledge and the ability to understand how to win your first owners. Tell me about what was the biggest jump for you? Was it the first 10 to 15 properties? Or was it going from 10 to 15 to 50? Where was it? Where do you find your your challenge in terms of scaling from a startup?
Well, I was comfortable in the eastern suburbs. I had done business development for at least about a 10-year period.
Yeah.
So I had some really solid contacts in place. So I knew that there was going to be an opportunity to, through those connections, to get some leads right from day one. But I think we were talking before that activity does create activity. So when you, until you get that presence with listings on real estate or domain, you have a property within a building or on a street that the neighbours hear about and come into contact with you, is that the first couple of properties, you're just not known. You're not on the radar.
No.
So I would say, look, that first 10 to 20 was difficult and just felt very slow. And then probably, as we started to get up into the 10s and around the 50 to 100 was definitely a lot easier than 0 to 50, definitely.
Was there any point where you thought, what have I done?
The biggest, because I do, again, from my own observations, I try to be more engaged with every single property that I represent. And so that means more engaged with the tenant and the leasing process for that property, more engaged with the updates and just that proactive nature with the landlords. I felt when I started to get into that 50 to 100, it's the range of activities that I myself, because I was on my own until just over 100, I think. And so that was... trying to not get in that space that I was very critical about with the industry of where they're just putting out fires and reactive. I was on the hunt for the right person around that stage pretty aggressively, because I thought I can't go out there and advocate something different and then be dropping the ball all over the place. So the biggest challenge for me was, there were two things to it. One was just being ahead of the game. When the volume of activity got to that level, but then also knowing that I wanted a very different caliber of property management professionals. I wanted someone that was excited about a startup, excited about my philosophy of offering not only good service to landlords but to tradespeople and tenants. I knew it was going to be a lot of reconditioning of the old school age property managers. So it was in my head of, but do I have time to train somebody from, let's say I got them from the hotel industry or what have you. So that was, the first, managing the workload for myself and then finding and handing over to the first person that came on board was challenging.
Hundreds are decent. That's a decent crack for somebody to be managing on their own.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. I know that when you started out, you made maybe a sort of a slightly out of the norm decision to start without a trust account. Why was that?
Because I wanted to, it just felt like, not that I was ever, because the bigger agency I'd worked at, we'd had trust accountants or whatever, but there were just parts of the industry procedurally that to me just felt very outdated, very sort of old school. And trust accounting, again, I wasn't working closely with it. It just seemed a lot of work. I had, like everyone else, heard of all of the all of the legal issues that a lot of real estate agents over the years of, embezzling monies, and because they can do with that whole trust accounting process. You got one person doing the entries, and it just felt very dated to me. So when I heard about for me, Manage, that was an instant payment platform and much more sort of streamlined, it felt aligned with what I wanted new management to represent, was a fresh approach, a simpler approach, a more transparent approach. It just felt aligned with me. Yeah.
Just with the structure that you've talked about, though, but the way that the team, now that you have a team, now you've got past that, doing everything yourself, but the way you structure your team is very next gen in terms of you don't have sort of a traditional, they do the traditional functions, but you don't give them the traditional titles.
Yeah. That was important to me.
Yeah.
Just to give a fresh, feel to it. And I just think, I don't know, I myself had there was a sort of almost a bit of a weight to when I referred to a property manager as a long-term tenant at the time. I had just recalled my own experience. And it's a bit like if you say, I was stuck on the phone for 10 minutes to somebody at a call center. Everyone kind of just, there's a feeling to that, there's a reference point. So I wanted to break that. Yeah.
We'll take a quick break there, Grant. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm with Grant McKay from New Management, one of the fastest growing PM businesses in the eastern suburbs. As we heard from the first section, Grant built it up to 100 properties on his own, scaled up. You're at that's circa 250 now.
Yep. Now,
disclaimer, I'm a customer. And it's been very interesting. We had a scenario where there was a potential for you. So when I bought the property, immediately when you took it on, you got $100 a week more than it was getting previously, which was a big jump for me. I was sort of fairly happy with the previous rental. And then we went through a process of, after that 12 months, and you sort of suggested it could be $50 more. And we went through quite an interesting process with the tenant, with the negotiation. This is where a caliber PM really comes in terms of their relationship with the owner. You'll obviously remember that.
Of course, yeah.
But it was, we ended up, you recommended a price we go for with the tenant. They ended up giving a little bit of pushback. But it's really interesting with your overall understanding of the property, because there were some structural issues with the property which shaped, your decision. Yeah, give a bit of visibility to that. You remember that? Wasn't that long ago?
No. And I, the thing that comes to mind before kind of highlighting some further specifics is that I think, for investors that hold a property, it's a big undertaking, it's a big risk, and you've got risk in terms of, vacancy, in repairs and maintenance, in, strata levies, in tenant disputes, whatever it is. So I always come back to whether it's leasing, lease renewals and rent negotiations, dispute resolutions, is that I think we have to step up to be the true professionals that we are, the practitioners in being advisors, and talking with our clients about what's the short to long term goal with their property, and I don't see that happening, because in that instance there was we had to look at and again it was a risk gain rather than just going, okay, let's put an incremental $50. If they come back with 25, let's just sit with that. It was a lot more complex with that, in saying, okay, the market, take the tenants out of the equation. If we were to take this property in the current market to the open market, then X could be achieved. But there's obviously some benefit in no leasing, expenses, no potential vacancy, the continuity with the current tenant. Now they're pushing back at X, and we've positioned that as slightly discounted from the market rent in recognition of that continuity. And then when they were pushing back, that we had to consider the works that was going on in the property and how would that potentially hinder reletting process. So there was dialogue back and forth with you and I and the tenants. And so rather than treating it, in a very simplistic way, we talked you through.
It was a negotiation.
Yeah.
It's interesting, again, for myself as an owner, that's a particular type of asset that I haven't had before. 150-year-old terrace 2-bedroom house in Paddington, and they need work on them.
Yeah.
And the owner education is a really interesting piece, because owners don't like spending money, and the margins are very thin for owners. We're sitting in an environment now where we're in an upward cycle in terms of interest rates again.
Yep.
You're getting hammered for tax from every angle.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability for the property manager, the custodian of the property, this is really down to it being a partnership with the owner.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you've got to be the bearer of some pretty bad news. And that particular situation wasn't cheap to get fixed, but it needed to be fixed because it was not good for the tenant. It was not good for the building. It was a damp issue, which is obviously there are health issues around that. So
yeah, definitely.
Do you have? You must have other properties of that type of nature where you have to have that kind of conversation with the owner to educate them, around sort of expenses.
Yeah. And I think, again, if you take the time to care and understand about the property, you've made some sort of relationship or rapport with the tenant to understand them, you understand the market, understand the short and long-term goal, is that you can, because it's not, I've seen some really challenging situations where landlords have been up for really significant, surprising costs that have had a big impact on them. But I guess if they feel supported and they feel like that you've done the legwork, the research, okay, well, what are my options here? How long will it take us to recover that? Can we do it in stages? What tradespeople do you have? Is there a payment plan? All of those things. It just, you're not leaving them kind of dropping a bomb and then walking away. So, again, it's being a professional, being an advisor. That's all you can do. Sometimes reality's reality.
It's interesting that the more time I spend learning about your industry, and it's a privilege to have a chance to sit with you and everyone else I have on the show, because I'm an owner, an investor. I'm not from within property management, but the PM is such a custodian of the property, and the thing is, right, the owner may not have bought that well in the first place because you buy it as it is. Yeah, you do your building and your pests, but there are things that happen. There are things that get covered up.
Yeah.
And quite often owners can end up with something that requires money to be spent that they hadn't anticipated in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
So the responsibility, the opportunity of trust for the PM and the ability to actually articulate that, to talk about it with the owner, has a profound impact, I think, on the ability to build trust and grow your business.
Yeah, definitely. No, I honestly, I can draw on so many examples, but I think, again, just getting back to what does this asset, short and long term, what does this asset mean for me? It's, we took over a property recently in the inner west, and it was a long-term, it was a house, an old house.
Yep.
It was a long-term tenant. They'd been there 8 years. And when we took over, I did what I always do, called, introduced myself, made a time to go and have a look at the property, meet the tenants. And they pointed out a number of repair and maintenance issues that they had been patient with. Now, when I looked through the list, there was certainly it was clear to make a priority list. And there were a couple of things at the top of that list that really needed to be looked at. And there were certainly a number of things that could be put into a bit of a capital works program. Yeah. But two of those immediate items, they were causing a lot of expensive damage to the property. And because there was no relationship with the agent and the tenant, the agent was pushing back on the tenant. This problem wasn't communicated, not that I knew of, to the landlord. It was progressing, and the money that we ended up having to spend to rectify that, that eroding situation, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah,
a lot worse. And I do see that all the time. So it's we do have to deliver some bad news, but I think if you deliver it in a professional advisory and clearly get across that you're in a partnership, you've done your research, here's what the options are, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, it just goes down a lot better. They feel a lot more supported.
And I think when they know you're aligned, because you've got a long-term relationship with the same asset, right? You draw your management fee from that asset and look after it and make sure it's tenanted. They will hopefully get some capital growth, and then they also get a yield from that asset. So there is an alignment. I think oftentimes I've had work with hundreds of property managers over the years with all the different places I've owned, and they've all been good because PMs are all good. Yeah. But you get PMs that actually really understand the value they bring to the owner as well as the tenant. And it's a light bulb moment for the owners, because they've got a partner in this investment. I'm interested to know, Grant, I haven't asked you before, although I am a customer.
Here we go.
So how do you set your management fees? You're in a competitive market. Yeah. And this is an important thing, and it's something I'm really interested to drill down into, because I think that understanding, I talked to Alistair Shearer a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and his fees are high, and he backs them, and he educates his owners. And he was saying that one of the owners, he'd run through all the things he was going to do, told the fee, and his owner said, "Oh, I thought it was going to be more than that."
Oh, gee, okay. I'd like to hear that. Look, I think in the eastern suburbs, anyway, I think there's a lot of there are a lot of options. Also, I find a lot of the landlords that I deal with they're educated in the terms of, maybe they've got other properties or so similarly to in the sales market, everyone's got a kind of a pulse on, okay, you try and get 3%, you ain't getting that. The market doesn't. Yeah. So, what I hear back after we put a proposal forward, I generally hear that we're in line. Yeah. Look, sure. Knowing the service that's provided and confidently standing behind mine, I perhaps could push it a bit more to sit above the rest. But at the moment, I'll be honest with you, my focus is long-term partnership. Yep. It's growing through word of mouth and networks. So, if we can work on the yield management, doing the best job, I just think, the centre got to look after itself.
Do many owners question management fee?
Yeah.
Do they? Yeah.
No, look,
I mean, I know that, going through the sales process, when as a vendor, I'm very, very sharp on, because you're talking about a big chunk of money. And one time I sold a property and I didn't negotiate and I signed and I got stung and it was agony.
Yeah. Look, I find, because I know what the competitive set, where it sits.
Yeah, it is very competitive, that marketplace.
It is. And so I sit within that range or at the top of that range confidently. I don't really get it a lot. I think if I tried to go in with a premium, it would probably regularly come up. Yeah. But because I sit within that range, and then people go, yeah, you know what, boutique agency, property management specialist, look at the reviews that they've got so they can stand by what they're, pitching to me, then, I don't have problems with that. There are a percentage of people that come to us with, can you sharpen that? The way I do it for transparency is that I'm pretty fixed with our rate is X. But if somebody presents us, say, a multiple property opportunity, then for rate parity, I have a slightly,
economies of scale in terms of the customer.
Yeah. But I see, no, it doesn't come up a lot. Yeah. But also getting back to how majority of the business is coming to us, significantly coming either through referral, so you're already qualified, or we get it through the online reviews that we have.
Which are high.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of them.
Yeah, I've worked hard at that. I've been more of a salesperson with the reviews than probably most property management companies or departments, but it's been a massive it's just getting back to somebody's going to make a change from another agency, or they're going to getting back to being a custodian of a significant asset. You sort of want people to not just listen to my sales talk, but actually have a reference point.
And when I look at a lot of different agencies around their Google reviews, they'll look, whether it's Google reviews or the various other mechanisms, so much of them tend to circulate around the sales side of the business.
Yeah.
Oh, so-and-so is a great agent. Oh, we're so happy.
Definitely.
And I think it's a really underutilized source of endorsement, validation, and also leads for the property managers.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to push them.
Yeah. But I think also, if there's investors listening, I think they should use that as a benchmark. If they're considering someone, I think we are now, and they'll see, there's only a couple that bubble to the surface with the reviews, the number of reviews and the consistency of the reviews is use that. I think if you're wanting to work with a professional, then there should be word of that on the street.
Definitely, yeah. And you can tell. I mean, you can tell authenticity with the comments. With the reviews. Have you got any sort of 1 stars or bad ones?
Look, I recently had a client I went into. It was a big property at Bondi. It was very expensive, and the prospective client was a bit cynical and really sort of pulling me to pieces. And she said, I must say, sitting there at 350 or whatever reviews, all 5-star. She said, have you bought those? And I actually genuinely haven't. But I'll tell you a funny story that because I am so focused on it and a little bit obsessive about it, because we get Google reviews and we get Rate My Agent reviews, and I had an account manager from Melbourne come up, and he said to me, look, it is pretty astounding that you have full 5-star reviews. He said, you might want to get a 4-star in there because, and this is before this woman brought this up, because it may look a little bit, but I mean, I'm paranoid for that first negative or average one to come through, but it's genuine.
I think people can tell authenticity. It's you can tell when you got your bunch of mates, and you'll see like bunches of them come in one go, and then there's nothing for a year.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that if genuine 5-star reviews, people can work out they can smell kind of like nonsense.
Well, the Googles, I think that's a little bit more open market. The Rate My Agent is actually qualified and verified, so you have to have been, as an owner or a tenant, linked to an actual address that has been advertised for rent. So it's easier to see through. Yeah.
So let's have a look at the future. You've had to grow in a very, very competitive market. I know the market well. In under 4 years to get to that level is through organic growth is impressive. We had a little bit of a chat offline about acquisition. You don't know about that for the time being. But what does the future look like? You've got a team of 4 now.
Yep.
At what point do you need to start to scale up in terms of your team? Is there a level of going, well, when I get to 350, when do I start to add to the team? What does the future look like?
Yeah, look, I'm looking at the moment. I definitely need another property services person. With that scale of growth is that the first quarter we just did, I think we just took on, it was about, I think it was 52 new managements in that. Now, again, it took me the best part of a year to get up to get, beyond the 50 and look towards 100. But so it's looking like that the growth is exponential. But look, I don't want to. I get even at this size, people are like, you're just trying to get to a number to sell it. And if I get back to that original point that I made, it wasn't. I still remain passionate about new management becoming a recognizable brand that represents something different in a marketplace that's just, I don't think, taking itself seriously, or can do better. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely, it can.
Yes.
And you don't have to be eastern suburbs. I think there's opportunities Australia-wide,
Yeah.
from regional to suburban to premium markets where PMs can really, be what they ought to be.
Absolutely. So to not put numbers on it, but we're more fluid now to be able to go, okay, let's build the team quickly, even if I've got to invest in people, the right people early to manage that growth. So I'm not reactive to that. So it's, I don't have a number to say, right, I'm trying to get to 50 and then liquidate. It's just more, activity creates activity. If we can have maybe not one office, but 2 or 3 offices and, get the word out more effectively that way. So, growth. But it's also, it's a challenging sector to get passionate, professional and committed personnel. So I'm looking at the moment and I've been surprised how long it's taken for this particular.
Hey, I'll tell you what, that's a good sign because you hire fast. And it doesn't matter what business you're in, whether you're in property management or anything.
Yeah.
In the media business, we go through periods where we can't find people and we suffer.
Yeah.
But we've learned to our detriment that hiring people quickly and going, they'll do, comes back to bite you.
Yeah. Okay.
I was caught up with actually Merlot from the Property Co-Lab. I went up to see her on Monday, and funnily enough, I was talking to her about growing her, but she's also scaled.
Yeah.
She's grown organically.
Yeah.
She hasn't acquired another, pure property management business and very, very successful like your own. And she was saying that she looks to hire people from outside of property management because, she's not bringing in some bad habits, maybe some preconceived ideas about how to run the business, and she's been very successful with her team that way.
Yeah.
But then they've got to learn the ropes and learn what it's all about.
Yeah, I'm definitely I'm in a position to do that now better than I was with, say, the first person. But just I'll give you a little example for the things I'm looking for. That the lady that works with me as our sort of that senior property services role. She's a property manager with over 10 years experience. And so in theory, I would have said, no way, that's not who I'm looking for. But she did something that was quite a standout for property managers, is rather than just going to recruiters or submitting, a resume out there digitally through recruiters or whatever, she actually picked up the phone and called me. And she said to me, look, I'm working at the moment, and the last 2 offices I've worked in have been really negative, and it's just not, it's not who I am. I found it quite difficult. And I was just sort of, scrolling, and I came across your agency, and I just sort of felt positive to me. So I just thought I'd pick up the phone. Like, that was a standout to me. I was like, who, what property manager from the ones that I had worked alongside do that? So I didn't have a job at the time. But it was such a standout quality. I said, let's have a coffee and have a chat.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And culture in property management, and we're going to have to talk about this another time because I could talk to you all day about this, but I have been spending enough time around the industry to know that it's very, very hard and it's all very tough in some organizations. And I think having a can-do culture and not being burdened down with the doing of property management and really sort of having a sort of a different perspective and an energy around property management. And I think often PMs can end up in a bit of a sideshow to the sales side of the business. And it feels bleak. Yeah. And maybe when you have hired quickly and you've just filled seats and you've got people who don't really want to be there, it can be quite a tough environment to work in. You create a culture, though, of can-do, of what I see as being, property management is the absolute backbone of real estate in Australia. Sure, sales, great, but property management is the enduring relationship that should be a career that people want to go into in property above and beyond sales. Yeah. You've obviously succeeded in doing that.
Agreed.
Grant, I'm very grateful for you coming along and joining us for the show. I'm also very grateful for your management of my property. We should chat to you again.
Sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it, Alex.
For everyone else tuning in, thank you very much for joining us. We love having you with us. We've had some fantastic comments coming through, so we really appreciate it. It's a privilege to talk to you. We'll catch up with you next time.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.